If we ever wake up with a feeling, we must address it. If there is a calling, just pay attention to it, even if it is for a moment. I feel like every time we get ourselves out of our comfort zone, or every time we listen to something that our gut is telling us, we are opening an opportunity for ourselves. This is your host, Dyutama, but you can call me DJ. And I love to inspire food photographers to dream. I spent 15 years as an architect studying buildings and constructing hospitals before taking the biggest leap of faith of my life, which was setting up a food styling and food photography business right from scratch. If you're a dreamer like me, wanting to start a new photography business or grow your existing food photography business, jump right into a world where I share practical, actionable strategies to improve your photography skills, to work with clients, make more money, all with a fearless mindset. This is the My Food Lens podcast, and we take you one step closer to your dreams. So let's go. Yo, welcome back, my friends. Oh my God, it feels amazing. It feels so good to be behind the mic and starting the new year with something I truly, truly love, which is bringing this podcast to you. So yay! I know we had to push the brakes, for a bit last year, but that was only so I would have a better grip when I return. And honestly, in these past few months of silence on the podcast, you know that it has been anything but quiet at my end. I mean, if you follow me on Instagram, you know that the past few months have been the craziest. They have been the busiest. And honestly, I'd say that it's been like a new era in my photography business, but I'll share more of that another time. All right. But I want to let you know that even though we might not have had any new episodes, there was a lot going on behind the scenes for the podcast, right from setting up a team to re-recording to creating new episodes to finding new amazing guests. I mean, everything possible that will serve you better is what was going on behind the scenes. It was action-packed, boss. And I'm excited. I'm so excited that I'll be able to bring those episodes to you starting today. Honestly, in this process, I've had a realization that I'm very lucky, and I'm not just saying it. I really felt that over the past few months. I felt, the time that I was not creating, I was not putting out the podcast. And then I was able to do that one more time, starting end of last year when I was actually doing all the action-packed work. I realized I am so lucky. It is such an honor for me. In fact, I'm so grateful that I have been able to serve you through this podcast, that these topics have helped you in your journey and you've seen real results. I mean, that is everything. All this effort, all this action-packed work that is going on behind the scenes, it felt so worth it. It feels amazing to be in a place where I've been able to play a part in moving you forward in your hobby, your passion, your journey. So before we even get into anything this year, like anything more on this episode, I want to say one thing to you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. With that, speaking of journey, let's talk of journey. I want to start this year with something a little bit different, a kind of a different episode, This episode is one in which I was actually a guest on Becky Hadeed's podcast. It's called The Storied Recipe. And we recorded this last year and she was on my podcast. And I think I talked about that. You might have seen that. But this episode is when I was on Becky's podcast and I want to share that with you. At the time when we recorded this podcast, Becky was a food photographer. She's kind of in a different space now. And if you've heard actually episode 43, you know what a powerful conversation that was. It was all about not having a photography business. Wow. So check it out. If you want to have like a fresh take on photography, check out episode 43. I'll put it in the show notes. But back to Becky. So Becky is an incredible storyteller. And at one point, definitely I used to associate food photography with her. So when I was on her podcast, I talked about a recipe. So it's called the Storied Recipe Podcast. All right. I talked about a recipe, and that recipe, it makes me cry every time. Like, I'm not even exaggerating. If you have a recipe that has deep memories, well, then you quite understand where I'm coming from. So I talked about a recipe that actually makes me cry. And I talked about my journey from being an architect to a photographer, every single risk I took along the way, and how I gave up everything for love. And this was like not my love for photography, not my love for podcasting. It was for my one true love, my soulmate, how I gave up everything for him. So on that podcast, I share why I cried while I was sitting on a plane and how I became a food photographer and how the pieces have come together for me over the last few years. Now you'll be like, what? I want to hear that episode, but the reason I want to share that with you and the reason I want to start the year with that is because I feel that many, many of you might relate to many parts of it. The move from a corporate career to a creative industry, the struggles, the fights. I feel like it was just not my fight. It's our fight. I feel like it's not just my story, it's our story. You might have gone through something similar. I mean, our journeys are so similar. And that's why, I want to share this with you because I feel like there are parts of it that are not just mine. I feel like we all kind of resonate with it. And I also want to share with you the one mistake that I made, and that was not recognizing my true calling in life, which actually might help you in recognizing or acknowledging something that you've been dodging. And I feel like that is a big part of my conversation with Becky. And so, you know why I want to share this episode. I just want to start the tone of the podcast for 2023 with this episode because we are all so connected in our journeys. This is the reason why I have this podcast. I feel connected as a part of your struggles, your fights. And this episode is a way of sharing mine so that you're not alone. All right. I hope that you'll have some laughs, some emotions, some inspiration, maybe a lot of nostalgia as you listen through this episode. And in Becky's words, let me take you on a journey through the twists and turns of a bold, brave life. So let's go.
I am back today and thrilled to introduce you to Dutima. Now, if you happen to be in the food photography world, you would not need an introduction to Dutima. She is the energetic, positive, professional woman behind the podcast titled My Food Lens, where she teaches up-and-coming food photographers about inspiration, technique, and especially the business side of things. Dutima is really qualified to do that. She was born and raised by a school teacher mother. Her mother was a history teacher, in fact. She also happened to be a radically experimental and wonderful cook. Dutima was also raised by her father, who was a neurologist in the Indian military. Because her father was in the military, Dutima and her sister and her parents moved every 3 years to a different part of India. And today, through her words and stories and images, Dutima takes us on a tour through many of the very landscapes and historical cities that she stayed in India. But more significantly, she takes us with her on the journey through the twists and turns of a very bold and brave life, including a massively successful career as a medical architect. This part of her life is fascinating. To when she chose love for her childhood sweetheart over everything else, how that affected her life, and then most recently, the surprising choice to start her career over in food photography. This is just a wonderful episode. It's super pleasant, incredibly interesting. I have lots and lots of links in the show notes to some of the places and things that she talks about, and I'm super excited to share it with you. Here's Dutima. I was wondering, because I noticed when we were on the phone last week, you have a big mug.
I do.
And
It's huge. And I got it from Miami. You know, one of those airport shops. Yeah, the 1 liter kind.
that
mug.
is too funny. So it's honey
I
lemon
know.
tea that you have in there. I was like, what is in that mug?
Yes, it's huge, and I think anyone who sees it is like, oh gosh. And I have tea, like free flowing tea the whole day.
Oh, do you?
So I just drink in liters.
Okay. And
Herbal
I mean,
tea, and
for a mug that size, is that like one tea bag or two, or do you just make your tea like in bulk and then you fill it up?
It's one tea bag.
One tea. Okay.
I love it. You know what? I always have that mug in all my podcast recordings. I'm always sipping tea. No one has ever asked me this.
Oh, really? Oh, yeah.
Yes.
I was noticing. And you know what's funny is we're like, what's that movie? I think it was called Big. It had like the really short guy and the really tall guy. So I'm the opposite because I only drink coffee. So of course, both times, it's been morning here and evening there. Like I'm just gearing up and you're just winding down. But I only drink coffee I have like little espresso mugs, and I don't drink espresso, but I drink coffee in them because I like my coffee to be really hot. And so by the time you've drunk the amount that's in an espresso cup, like you would have to go back to the microwave and reheat it anyways, which destroys the taste.
Oh my God. You're the opposite.
Yes. And I can't drink a lot of caffeine. I just start to get like physically anxious. I just feel even if there's nothing really on my mind, and I don't like that feeling. So yeah, I just drink out of my little espresso cups, and you've got your big, huge cup. We're like Goldilocks and the three bears.
We should do cheers sometime.
Yes, a virtual cheers.
Exactly.
A virtual cheers. God. Yes. So, well, I'm so looking forward to talking to you and to introducing you, I guess, in some ways more to your podcast followers, because like this I have such tiny hints about you. I know of course about your very vivacious personality and your amazing presence on video.
Thank you.
Oh yes, it's quite, it definitely stands out in a wonderful way. I know about your tea drinking. Well, I didn't know that. I knew about your big mug. I know that you were an architect, and now you are a food photographer and a food podcaster. I think that's almost everything I know about you. And what I don't know at all is your story. Like I have this snapshot of Dutima, as in this period of time, but I don't know your story. Like what's made you that? So, the only hint I have, maybe tell me, is that you recently took a trip to India. Does this give me a hint to your story?
Yeah, I did take a trip to India, and it was actually a very emotional thing for us.
Oh, really?
So I live in Singapore, and my entire family lives in India. And you know how big India is. So everybody lives in different cities, and these cities are in every direction of the world that you can possibly imagine. So north, south, east. So when my daughter was born, within 3 months of that, COVID happened. And we live here in Singapore, so none of our family is here. And so for the following 2.5 years, we never got to see them. And my daughter grew up literally, so old, just not knowing who grandparents were, what grandparents were, what does Nana mean? She had never met cousins. She didn't know what a brother or sister meant, So for us, yes, taking that trip to India was introduction of our daughter to our family, like in a very official way. They had only seen her when she was 2 months old. Wow. And so she was 2.5, over 2.5, close to 3, when we had to take this trip. The other thing that had happened was that when COVID happened, my father, he suffered a heart attack. And that was the time when the entire world was in a lockdown, so strict that even within India, my sister lives in Mumbai, and she could not travel to Patna, which is a 3-hour flight. They couldn't cross. There were no flights. You couldn't cross state borders. So my dad, thankfully being a doctor, timely action was taken. He was healthy. But at that time, we went through this phase of helplessness and, a really, really bad feeling of just not being there for your parents. So, I mean, this trip was very emotional at, many different levels. And what was funny was that when we told our parents that, okay, we're finally coming to India, we're finally coming, we can visit you. Of course, they were very happy. But my mom's first question was, what would you like to eat? What should I make? So that's it.
Great.
I mean, you said you have a little hint of me, but that itself is everything about me. I am all about food, and that question of hers, it literally set the tone for our travel. And we traveled from Mumbai, which is like a coastal city south of India. We went all the way to Jammu and Kashmir, which is the northernmost state, which is where my in-laws are, and it actually borders with China, and it's so beautiful.
So
that
Eastern.
This is Jammu Kashmir is up north.
Okay.
And it's so beautiful. It's actually compared to Switzerland.
Wow.
It's the mountains, the Himalayas, like it's amazing. And then my parents live in East India, which is in Bihar, which is very close to Bengal, actually. And then my husband's brother, he lives in Guwahati, which is further east in a state of Assam, which is close to Myanmar and Tibet.
Wow.
So our family was spread out everywhere. We traveled everywhere except we couldn't go and meet my husband's brother. But other than that, we had family reunions. We saw hundreds of relatives. We ate like we were starving. And so it was definitely an emotional trip, but it was like a gastronomic explosion. That's what I would call it.
That's amazing. And I love that was your mom's first question. I'm looking at a map here of India, these different states to see. So how long was this trip?
We went for 2 weeks. We ate for 2 years. It wasn't, I mean, that's how long my husband could take off from work.
Yes. Okay.
But it was very packed. It was not a relaxed holiday. I wouldn't say, because with family, it's always like that. And then, of course, we were very tired from all the eating, It takes a ton of strength to chew that much.
Well, there's a lot of digesting going on. It saps your energy from the rest of your systems.
So 2 weeks was really tops that our body could take it. Yep.
And how is your dad's health?
He is much better. He's all healthy. He had a surgery right then. And so his food has changed a lot. Mom's cooking has changed a lot. They've lost a ton of weight, but he's happy, healthy. He plays golf every single day that he's been playing for the last 35 years.
Wow.
So he's doing well.
That's great. So did your mom cook the new healthy dishes for you, or the old favorites?
Oh no. They were definitely the old favorites. And Dad loved it because it was like, his cheat day.
Oh, that's
for a long time. Yes.
That's great. Now, Indian food is naturally healthy in many ways. It leans heavily on, legumes and vegetables. Is this true? So mostly it was a matter of changing out oils, or do you know how she made that change?
Yes, absolutely. And you're so right to say that. I think the ingredients are very healthy. The combination of ingredients is very healthy. And how a meal is put together in India, I think that is also very healthy, because you have a portion of carbohydrate, which is either your rice or roti. Then you have lentils, some kind of lentils. And then you always have a vegetable or a meat or, something, a third thing, which is your protein, and fiber, it. So it's usually a very balanced meal. I feel like, of course, anyone can make anything unhealthy by, over frying, over creaming, over sugaring, so over salting also. So what Mom did was take away those things. So she took away a little bit of salt, most of the sugar, a lot of refined food, and she switched to like really like whole, mostly everything whole grain, that kind of a switch. She still makes everything. She just switches things out. So instead of cheese, she might do cauliflower on a bake, So she's made those switches. But yeah,
Wow.
she's a great cook. So she turns anything really into something tasty. So that's complained a little bit. Has
Yes.
complained.
Yeah.
But she's been able to control that. I think mom's the only one who can control that. So
Oh, she's the only one who could make that kind of change, convince him to. They have a wonderful relationship, it sounds like.
Yeah. I would say once definitely. My mom was a teacher for like 30 years. So she's definitely strict and very disciplined. And she's definitely a teacher in the house and a principal in the house as well. So you can imagine dad, there's no choice. Like he has to listen to her.
But he's a doctor. So outside of the house, he's telling his patients, perhaps his staff, what to do. But inside the house, your mom rules the roost.
Exactly. Absolutely.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Well, I'm sure he depends on her.
Yes, he does.
Yeah. Well, as long as we're talking about your mom, I want to skip down there and talk about your mom and her cooking a little bit more. And I actually, when you submitted this recipe, so again, can you tell me how to pronounce this?
Okay. So it's called sarso machli.
Sarso machli.
Machli. So sarso means mustard.
Oh,
that's the Hindi name for mustard, and machli is the Hindi name for fish.
Okay.
So sarso machli means fish in mustard curry or fish in mustard.
Okay. So when I read, thank you for that, sarso machli. So when I read your description, it really touched me. So I want to introduce people listening a little bit more to your mom by reading to them what you wrote. So you wrote, sarso machli is my comfort food, my soul food, my ultimate food. My first memory of delicious food is from when I was 3 years old, and it involves this fish curry. This recipe has everything to do with my mom. I still remember my first taste of this recipe was sitting on the living room carpet. My mom had a thali with this fish curry on steamed rice. She was taking out the bones from the fish pieces, mixing the fish with rice, and feeding her 2 daughters with her hands. I thought that was such a tender description of your mom. And which is so interesting because now you're also describing her as someone who really runs a tight ship. So
that is true.
Tell us a little bit more about her.
First of all, thank you, Becky, for, bringing back that memory. It's always very emotional for me.
Oh, well, tell us about that then. That's amazing that you remember something so specifically from 3 years old. That's young.
It's crazy. My memory is crazy.
Yes, it is.
I sometimes my parents are amazed at the things that I actually remember. And out of there would be 10,000 other things that happened when I was 3 years old. I don't remember those, but I most definitely remember this one. And it's crazy because I remember that we used to live in Delhi. I also remember the time of the day.
Really?
It was around dusk.
Wow.
And I remember Dad was at the hospital. He was seeing patients. And that I almost remember the carpet that we had.
Really?
We sat in the middle. It was like a triangle. We sat in a triangle, mom at the head and the 2 daughters. I was 3 years old. My sister was 7 years old. She's 4 years older to me. And that's it. We just went, mom was just mixing the fish and the rice and and the curry. And in India, we eat with our hands. So she just literally, she fed one daughter and then she fed the other daughter. And I can never forget that,
That's beautiful. That's beautiful.
So no matter, I don't know, I think I've had this fish curry maybe over 100 times in my lifetime.
Wow.
But every time I take that first bite, it just takes me back to that house in Delhi,
That's amazing. It's such,
Yeah.
yes, it is such a beautiful, it's such a beautiful image of the care and the tenderness of a mother for her daughters to feed them with her own hands. And she had made this dish before she fed you.
Oh yeah. This is a
Mm.
very traditional. It's actually like a Sunday food, you know. Everybody has
Mm.
something like for some folks it's pizza, for somebody it's pasta, and there's a
Mm.
special something that you associate with Sundays or a rainy
Mm.
day, and this
Mhm.
is what it was for us. So we made it at least once a week, maybe
Mm.
once in 2 weeks. So it was not something special, but it
Mhm.
was always special because
Mm.
it tasted so damn good.
Mm.
So, and also there are so many variations of
Mm.
cooking mustard and of cooking fish in mustard curry. The
Mm.
one with radish, the recipe that I mentioned,
Yes.
is one of them. And my mom can make at least 15 different variations of it. And I'm sure other folks can make even more than that. There are over 20 of these, So they're very like little subtleties can completely change the flavor. But the thing
Mm.
is that the combination of that mustard paste and the fish in
Mhm.
it, it's just, I don't know what it is for me. For me, it's like, I can eat it all day, every day. And
Mhm.
it will always take me back to that, sitting on that carpet in the
Mm.
living room, mom feeding us. It's just always like that for me.
Mm. Yes. What a beautiful, beautiful moment. I feel really touched by that. That's amazing. Mm. Um, well, let me ask a little bit more about the dish then. You said there's so many different variations. Is
Mhm.
that based on like you were explaining earlier, because India is such a diverse country when it comes to climate zones, which of course means agriculture. Does that define most of the differences, or is it also, of course, just you cook with what's on hand and everyone has their own family recipe?
Yeah, a little bit like that. So,
Mm,
one is ingredients. So, you can
mhm,
make this a similar curry with prawns, eggs,
mm,
potato, pumpkin,
mm.
eggplant, mutton. So, you can have
Wow.
a vegetarian version, a vegan version. You can do
Mhm,
meat version, a fish version. You
mhm,
can also do a steamed version. So, it's literally any of this, it's just steamed with that mustard paste and mustard oil.
mm,
So the options are like a little bit different in the tempering. So for
mhm,
example, we use coriander seeds or fenugreek seeds,
mm,
and you could use fresh fenugreek leaves for tempering as well.
mhm.
You could just
Yes.
use tomatoes. So there are subtle differences, but
Mhm,
also you could completely change the technique of cooking, which is
mm,
steaming versus just boiling.
mhm,
And you could switch out the ingredients based on your
mm.
taste. So
Yeah.
yeah.
But the
Mhm.
key thing that defines this is the mustard based sauce.
100%.
That's
And the
the key
mustard
thing.
oil, 100%. Yes.
Yes, I have never heard of mustard oil before.
Ah, okay.
And so
Wow. Mhm.
yes, this is very common for you. Is it common in Singapore as well? Do you find it easily there?
We do find it easily because we have a ton of Indians here.
Yeah.
However, in your defense, it
Uh-huh.
is it is not. I mean, it's not a common ingredient in all of Indian cuisine. Like you
Mm.
said, how diverse
Mhm.
India is, right? So
Mhm.
we have like 28 states,
Mhm.
and in each state, like even the languages are different. So we have, I
Mhm.
think, 22 official languages, and we
Mm.
have close to 20,000 dialects of
Mm.
languages, like so
Mm.
much diversity that even my husband and I don't speak the same language. We come from
Really?
different places. Yeah. The only common language between us is English and Hindi. But
Mm.
at home, his folks speak a different language, which I don't understand. And I speak another language, which he doesn't understand. So
Mm.
it comes down to the same thing with food.
Mhm.
Literally every few 100 kilometers in India, the
Yes.
food changes a little bit. It changes a little bit. And
Yes.
every state has a different cuisine.
Mm.
There is a little bit of overlap, but it's different. So
Mhm.
mustard oil is a very, I would say, north or east Indian cooking.
Okay.
But if you go to
Okay.
South India, it's coconut oil or vegetable oil or canola oil or things like
Yes.
that. It's mustard oil is very selective and not everybody uses it. But because the place that I come from grows a ton of mustard,
Mm,
it just becomes, the oil of choice.
mm,
So mostly for most of the meats,
mhm,
especially in North India, they would definitely cook it in the very, pungent, smoky kind of mustard oil.
mhm.
It gives it amazing flavor. So in your defense, not every Indian also cooks with mustard oil. So I totally get it.
Yeah, this is so interesting. So first of all, I wish I had thought ahead. I was just at an Indian market on 2 days ago. Yeah, so that would have been
Hmm.
Tuesday, and
Yeah.
I should have looked. I should have looked while I was there. And seen it. And well, so first of all, just as a little aside, it's funny because I actually have an episode. It was one of my earliest episodes named Every 100 Kilometers in India because
Aha!
I had a guest named Pradeep on and he said there's a saying, every 100 kilometers in India, the food, the language, and the religion changes. And I
That's
thought,
true.
yes, I think that's amazing. I think that's amazing. So I understand now definitely for sure what the mustard oil brings to a dish. Like
Hmm.
obviously so much flavor. In terms of cooking with it, high smoke point, low smoke point, like is it touchy to work with or is it pretty easy to work with? Like when I go to make this dish.
I think it's easy to work with,
Mm.
or maybe because I've seen it and I've worked with it as a child.
Yes.
So I would say, I would say it's easy. You just
Mm.
have to heat it up well, and it kind of gets a
Mm.
little bit frothy when it's
Oh.
when it's heating up, and
Oh.
you don't make it smoke too much.
Mm.
You just allow it to come to a good temperature, a
Mhm.
good hot temperature, and then that's it. Just cook like your normal oil.
Okay.
It's actually not too bad at all. It's just the foamy part can throw you off sometimes.
Mm.
But other than that, no, all
Okay. That's good to know because I think I would freak out a little bit. My mustard started getting frothy if you hadn't told me. And
Oh,
probably
man.
I would probably end up turning it down too low and it wouldn't cook properly.
I,
So
yes,
I'm
yes.
glad you said that. Okay, well, as long as we're staying on this, let's talk a little bit more about me making this recipe.
Mm.
I have to do justice to this precious recipe.
I'm so sorry. I couldn't think of
No.
anything else. I was like, what should I share? And I felt like there was nothing
Yes.
stronger for me.
Yes, do not be sorry. I love working with new ingredients, learning new methods. This is the idea. This is the heartbeat of this podcast. It's a thank you. Thank you for this
Amazing.
recipe.
You're amazing.
No, I love it. Yes, because the thing is, then I get to incorporate these things into my pantry, and some of them really, take over as something that we use frequently. So, you specifically said to avoid using tuna. So why is this, and what fish would you use?
So this is typically made with freshwater fish,
Mm.
not a sea fish, which is
Okay.
how we always had it. But I have lived outside India for way too long, and I've had to work with a ton of different fishes to make it taste somewhat similar.
Mhm.
Because I'm honestly, I've never used tuna. But just knowing the structure of tuna and the taste of tuna, I have a feeling that it's not going to complement the mustard.
Okay.
How you have, actually thinking about fish and the combination of fish and mustard, it's actually universal. So, how you have salmon with mustard, that's a combination.
Yes.
Which is why salmon works beautifully in this curry.
Mm.
And it's a more robust fish. I just feel that tuna is so powerful itself that it may not soak up all the goodness of the curry and really have flavor all the way through it. So
Okay.
I've never tried tuna, but the other fish that works very nicely is sea bass.
Oh,
It is
okay.
actually the closest to a freshwater fish that, the way we make it. Sea bass is a very delicate fish. I don't know. Have you worked with sea bass?
Never. Mm-mm.
It's very delicate. It's a white fish, but you have to kind of just semi fry it so that it holds together and
Okay.
then slowly release it in the curry. So I
Okay.
feel like salmon and sea bass have definitely are winners for me after trying many different fishes.
Okay. This is good to know. This is good to know. Yeah. And you have access to so many fish there in Singapore.
True, true, true.
Yeah.
We
Okay.
do.
Talk to me about you mentioned your mom picking the bones out one by one. Do you now make this with fish that's already been kind of like salmon, the way we buy it here in the US? I mean, it's pretty
It's a fillet,
processed.
is it?
Yes, yes,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
So is this did you make it with whole
You can make
fish
it
or
with either, you can,
mm,
not a whole fish for
mm,
sure. You want the pieces because you want the curry to get into it. So you
mm,
definitely want like a, a piece. When
mm,
I cook with salmon, it's basically fillet
mhm,
and it barely has any bones in it. But
mhm,
I usually get a full sea bass and I get it cut at the fish market.
mm,
So I get it cut in steak, as
mhm,
steak pieces. It
mhm,
still has all the bones and everything in it, including the fish head, including the
mm,
tail. We eat
mm,
all of it. So,
mm.
so
Is that like the lucky piece, or like, and people in your family, are they, yay, I got the head, or is it, well, I guess this is my lot, I'll take it?
you either hate it or leave it. I mean, hate it, love it or hate it. And I actually love it. And my
Do
sister
you?
hates it. So it works out great.
Okay.
So head, actually, a fish head is supposed to be a very, it's fish full of fish oils, I think.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
So they say that children who eat fish head turn
Mhm.
out to be very intelligent. And by
Mm.
experience, I can definitely vouch for it because I always ate the fish head.
Well, it makes sense. I mean, the brain is the fatty. Our brains are
Hmm.
almost all fat, you know.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, so I could easily see that being the case for sure. And like you said, obviously,
Yes, yes. I use that
obviously.
against my sister all the time. Oh. But yeah, going back to your
Okay.
question, I guess fillet of salmon
Mhm.
or something, a delicate fish cut in
Mhm.
steak
Mhm.
pieces, either should work for you.
Yeah. And you just accept the fact that the bones are in there. I like that.
Yeah.
I think what I like is that it didn't seem um I, I I don't know. There's something about this idea, like the farther we get away from our food, the less,
Hmm. Hmm.
not maybe not physically healthy, but like emotionally or psychologically healthy, I guess it is in some
Yeah.
ways. And I kind of like the fact that it's just like, well, there's bones in fish, so you pick them out. That's what it is.
Yeah.
There's
But
tails on shrimp.
actually, in Indian cooking,
Mm,
Becky, we almost never take out the fish bones. It's just
mhm,
we just get it cut like that. And similarly for
mhm,
meat, if we are cooking mutton,
mhm.
I particularly go and buy meat with bone. Like
Mm,
and we eat goat meat a lot more
mhm,
than lamb.
mm,
So I will go and buy meat on the bone because it
mhm,
is also more tender. So I've also
mm,
noticed that if you just cook it with the fillet of salmon, it could
mhm,
dry out if you overcook it.
mm,
But when you have fish with bone, it
mhm,
retains a little bit of that juiciness inside, a little
mm.
bit more.
Hmm. This is such a good point. Yeah, and I think also there's marrow in the bones that leach out into
Mm.
the sauces, which are really quite healthy as well.
True, true, true.
Mm.
Absolutely.
How about the skin?
Yes, we keep the skin on and
Mhm.
we crisp it up a little bit. And once it goes
Mm.
into the curry, it also soaks up all the flavor. Oh my
Mm.
God. So my sister hated it. I loved it.
Mhm.
Again, great for the skin.
Yes,
Yours
talk about
and
full of oil. Yeah. Oh,
yeah.
oh,
We
great for our skin. Oh.
yes. But yeah, we keep it on. I don't remove except for scales and cleaning up the inside of the fish. I honestly
Mhm.
don't remove anything. Yeah, I don't know.
Mm. Okay. Oh, I'm learning so much. This is great. Learning so much. Radishes. I
Mm,
think, I mean, radishes are like a springtime, cool weather um, crop here. We're talking about the same radishes?
yes, yes.
Mm,
So yeah, radish is definitely a winter crop, a
mm,
cold weather vegetable, even in India, which
mhm,
is why I think, you know, we have so many variations of the mustard curry because sometimes you do have radish
Mhm.
in season and sometimes you don't. So you just make it another way. I I I live in Singapore and
Mhm.
we get everything here all seasons because most of our produce comes from Malaysia, Australia, and
Mm.
so when the world is going through summer, Australia is going
Mhm.
through winter,
Yes.
and when
Mhm.
and it's the opposite. So
Yeah.
we get everything all year round. So I have actually lost track of what's seasonal and what's not, to be honest,
Yes.
which is not
Mhm.
good. Which is
Yes.
not
Mhm.
good.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
but I don't know if you've had trouble finding radish or
No,
it's
I
not
wouldn't.
available.
No, I wouldn't have trouble finding them. It's just, I mean, I think really I'm commenting on it because it was one of those moments where you sort of acknowledge your own ignorance, right? Like I just didn't think of that as a type of food that I would find in India, you know? So I think it's just like,
Ah,
oh, this is a good, again, reminder to me of how diverse the climate zones and, well, everything, like we said, every 100 kilometers, right? So,
exactly.
I think, yeah, it only stood out to me because, like I said, of my ignorance. Also, sometimes there are, I'm trying to think of a really good example, and I can't off the top of my head, but sometimes there's like, I'm saying a word and a guest is saying a word, but we're not actually talking about the same vegetable. Like that has happened in the past, you know? Um,
Ah,
so yeah, but it sounds like we're talking about the same thing. And I have never, I don't think, put radish with mustard, but we're talking about two very similar flavors in a way, something very
mm,
sharp. Um,
exactly. Yep, you
mm,
got it. Absolutely right. That's
okay.
exactly why they go so well together. And it's amazing how radish is so sharp when you eat it raw.
Mm,
But once it goes into the
mm,
curry, it it's amazing in texture. It's
mm,
not very crunchy. It's
mm,
also not mushy, soft, but it soaks up that mustardy flavor and
mm,
it's not as sharp anymore. It's
yes.
so balanced. I don't know how and what kind of a chemical reaction happens in there,
Mm,
but it's definitely much easier to eat and it adds so much to that curry. Oh gosh.
yeah. Well, the sharpness probably seeps into the
Hmm.
sauce, the curry itself.
Hmm. Hmm. I think so.
You said, yeah, yeah. You said the biggest mistake someone can make is that the mustard is not ground finely enough. What
Yes,
kind of
yes.
tool? I did an episode where a guest taught us how to make chai masala. And so for that reason, I got a spice blender. So are we talking more about using a spice blender or like um, a regular blender? What are your, I don't want to make the number one mistake. So tell me how to avoid it.
So, does your spice blender allow
Mm.
you to do wet mixing?
I can't, I would be uncomfortable doing that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, I think most spice blenders are not for wet mixing.
Mm,
So, this one is definitely wet mixing.
hmm
I use my regular Kenwood blender. I don't have any fancy appliances or I don't have anything special for my cooking.
hmm
It takes me maybe a little bit more time, a little bit more effort,
hmm
but I just use my regular blender.
hmm
And what you need to do is not give up. You cannot give up. So you have to just blend. So just pulse a little bit and then
Mm,
blend a little bit. Just make sure that you don't add too much water or too little water.
mhm,
That is a problem. So just keep it like, you know how when you blend
mhm,
avocado and you look down into the blender and
mm,
you see the pulpy kind of, the
mhm,
kind of feel, it's almost like that.
hmm.
And the yellow mustard seeds, they turn white.
Yeah,
That is an
interesting.
indication that it has been done properly. If they are
Mm,
still looking yellowish,
mhm,
that means they can go further, just little by little, and keep mixing them up,
mhm,
taking the bottom or something from the
mhm.
sides, just mix it up, just keep going. And it might take you a little bit more time in the regular blender, but it will happen.
It'll get
So
there. Okay.
yes, look for the white color. The moment it begins to turn whitish, you know that you're doing well. You're doing well.
Okay. So
Yeah.
is the resulting sauce itself actually white or does it turn back yellow when it cooks?
It's the turmeric. So the
Oh, the
turmeric makes it
turmeric. Yeah.
yellow. Yes, yes.
Got it. Yes. I was like,
Mm.
wait a second. I've seen this picture. Okay. Got it. That of course, of course, of course. Okay. And then when I'm assembling it, well, I guess you cook it all together, but what's the ratio? Like, are we talking about this fish is really almost swimming in a curry, or is it kind of, you know what I'm saying? Is there a little sauce
Yeah,
on top?
yeah.
And tell me, it's a related question, the ideal consistency of the sauce. Like how drippy is it, I guess,
Okay.
of the curry? I shouldn't say
So,
sauce, of the curry.
mm, so it's definitely swimming in curry.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just sauce that you put on top. So imagine that you've got all this rice and you have to mix it up with that curry. So you have to have enough of it.
Mm-hmm.
But the key here again is when you're making the curry, you're adding all that water. There is, the mustard paste that has been cooking in the tomatoes and the turmeric powder, and then you put in the water.
Mm-hmm.
You have to allow it to boil enough, and you'll yourself notice the texture of the curry begins to change. It'll get thicker.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not like thick like soup. It's actually got a very lush kind of a texture. It's not watery. It is not like you can see ingredients separate. They look homogeneous. When you pick up a spoon and you pour it, it's actually got a bit of volume to it, but it's not drippy or it's not thick enough to be called a sauce.
Yeah.
So I guess it's a balance in between. And also I find like Indian food is a little bit forgiving that way. Like if you like it watery, just keep it like that, man. If you like it saucy and you like it thick, then just go that route. But typically if you ask, it's between the watery and the saucy.
Okay. I got it. Okay. I think you've prepared me well. I'm going to give it my best shot. And I know, like you said, the dish, and I'm sure yourself will be forgiving too, depending on my results.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
I'm excited to try it. So, well, going back to your story, your life, did you, you remember your mom making this for you, you first eating it, and this, like, you said dusk, I'm imagining this golden light, shining through the windows. How about cooking it? Did your mom do all the cooking in your home? And then did she teach you, like, were you interested in cooking when you were younger or just eating?
I was definitely, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go for it.
I was definitely interested in eating. I remember I was a year old or two, and we had uncles and aunts, and every time they came home, I was eating, and they had nicknamed me around food because every time they entered the house, I had food in my mouth. I was always holding something. I was always eating. So I have this eternal connection with food for sure. But my mom, actually, if it was not for my mom, I would have never been a food photographer. She's like, obviously, she was amazing, not just in cooking, but she could cook different cuisines of the world. Like and I'm talking about a time in India where there was hardly any internet. There was no Google. We knew of countries, but we didn't know of cuisines, And the only way that you could find out about a certain cuisine was through a cookbook, through a recipe book. Yeah. She had a whole collection of those, and she loved cooking so much that she would read. And she introduced us, like, as I was not even 10 years old, and we used to eat crepes for dinner, and she would make risotto for us. And she got one party, she served a baked Alaska, and she would do all this fancy cooking. And later, many years later, I told my husband, mom used to make all of this, and he had never even heard of them. So we were not the average Indian family. Mom really, really introduced us to a lot of world cuisine. So she gave us a very good palate.
And your mom wasn't just sitting, she was teaching all day.
Yes. Oh my God. My mom was like super mom. Oh goodness. She was teaching all day, and she did everything around the house. Like she's a rock star. I'm pretty sure everybody thinks like that about their moms. And my mom was no exception. She could do 10 things like at one time.
Wow.
Multitasking was one of her these things, but she was also multi-talented. She she was a history teacher, so she was in school most of the day. She would get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to make lunch before she left for school. And I know in the US, 4 o'clock is not that unheard of, but in India, it most definitely is.
It's early for me. Let me tell you that. 6 o'clock is my alarm. And I feel insulted at 6 a.m.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, she would just wake up at 4 o'clock. She would cook the entire lunch. And that was dal and rice and vegetables. And, and dad always wanted one more thing. So she would have 4 things cooked at 4 o'clock in the morning. And then she would leave for school, come back, heat up the food. Everything would be ready. She used to do that. And so obviously her love for cooking was one thing. And then she was a prolific writer. She used to write like amazingly. And then in the afternoon, she had a scooter. She would put her helmet on and ride, in the scorching heat. She would go and pay bills and collect deliveries and go run chores. And, on the weekend, she would take us street shopping. So she was just incredible.
Wow. I'm starting to understand where your energy comes from.
No, but she did. I think she was also a wonderful and an amazing baker. So when I was I think I was 5 years old. Okay, I'm not 100% sure there, but maybe I was 5 years old. And she taught me how to bake a vanilla cake.
Wow.
So that was my first experience of really cooking or baking or just being in the kitchen just doing everything on my own and not just sitting there and watching food and waiting, and waiting for it to be done. She taught me. So she taught me how to bake. And from there on, I think no one else was actually allowed to cook in the house because dad was unanimously voted as the one person who will never be allowed to enter the kitchen. But I used to my sister was a little less interested. I loved cooking and I would take all these recipes from mom. I would try to cook them up and then I would butcher them because I could not stick to a recipe. I just wanted to maybe a little bit here, maybe a little bit there.
Oh, I relate to that. Yes.
Oh gosh, my mom would be so furious. She's like, no, that's not the way you do it, Since you talked about, mom and introduction to food, when we lived in Delhi, dad was very busy. He's a neurologist. So at that time he was studying, getting his super specialization. So he was out a lot and we saw a lot more of mom. And especially on weekends, mom used to take us to street shopping and, all the fun stuff. So I still remember one weekend, we were out street shopping. And then, I don't know if you've heard of Connaught Place, but that is like a signature, from the old British era. It's one of the older shopping areas of Delhi. It's beautiful. We were shopping there and then we stopped for lunch.
Okay.
And mom took us to this fast food restaurant. It was called Wimpy's.
Wimpy's?
Wimpy's.
Okay.
And it was novelty at that time in India, having a fast food restaurant. It was like the grandfather of McDonald's. So it came 20 years before McDonald's in India, So Wimpy's was, I don't even know whether it was an Indian brand or not, but it was very similar to McDonald's. It was a burger chain, pizza chain, just fast food.
Yeah.
And so we went to Wimpy's. It was our first time at Wimpy's. We were so excited. We're sitting there. Then our tray arrives and there are these little burgers on it. And then there was this pile of cabbage. And it looked strange. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to, take a bite. Let's see how it is. So I take a bite and it was really nice. And I looked up and, I looked at mom and I said, Mom, what is this? And, in that she had this look on her face, yes, ask me, I'm the guru, So she just looked at me and she's like, that is called coleslaw.
Oh,
so that was my introduction to coleslaw. I'd never eaten coleslaw in my life. So she knew it.
She really did know.
Yeah. I don't know when she went to Wimpy's. I don't know when she had coleslaw in her life, but she knew everything about international foods.
That is amazing.
So Yeah, this is the childhood like I had around food, all
Mm,
thanks to mom, really.
yes, and so much more. Now, did you all you've said a couple times when I lived in Delhi, did you
Mm.
travel a lot as a family or did you move a lot as a family, which I guess is a separate question to did you travel a lot as a family?
We did both.
Mm,
And that is because my dad was in the Indian Army
mm,
and we had to actually move every 3 years.
mm.
So we were posted in many different parts of India.
Wow.
We moved about 8 cities
Wow.
throughout. Yeah. And we lived in Delhi for a long time. We had two postings in Delhi. So I spent a long time over, 3 years in
Mhm.
one tenure and 4 years in another tenure. So we
Mm.
spent a long time in Delhi. And then later, after I finished my architecture, I again went back and I was living in Delhi for a while. So I guess
Okay.
I'm very familiar with Delhi and we spent a large chunk of time there, but we traveled a lot. Like, for
Mm.
example, Jammu Kashmir, which is where I met
Mhm.
my husband, is where I
Okay.
went to middle school. That's where my
Wow.
dad was posted. So
Wow.
we lived there for 3 years and then we moved to many, many other cities. So we moved a lot and we traveled a lot, both.
Wow. Okay. So just thinking on how amazing your mom was. Well, first of all, she probably, if she knew international cuisine that well, she probably knew the cuisines of India like the back of
She
her
did.
hand. Like she was very fluent, I guess. She was very fluent in the different regional cuisines.
She was. And she's the one, like, even today, if you talk to her about Indian food, she will,
Mm-hmm.
because she's a history teacher, right? So she will not
Mm.
just tell you about the food, she will tell you about the history of food. So if you
Mm-hmm.
eat biryani with her, which is a
Mm-hmm.
meat and rice dish, she will tell
Mm-hmm.
you exactly how the Nawabs made the biryani. So she always
Wow.
has a history lesson, and sometimes we like it, sometimes we don't.
Oh, wow. I think I need to have your mom on the podcast. That would be extraordinary to learn the history of so many of these famous foods. That's amazing. So
Mm.
I'm assuming she didn't have access to a lot of like you guys never lived in a generational home or with in-laws or anything like that. She was always really on her own without a lot of support doing all these things.
That's right. We
Mm-hmm.
were always by ourselves. Like we
Mm-hmm.
had a nuclear family, and that's also because we moved a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And my grandparents, my aunts, uncles, they were mostly in Bihar, which is where I'm from, the state.
Mm.
So yeah, she
Okay.
didn't have much help. And but what she did have is her mother, in the sense
Oh.
that even my mom's mom, my
Mhm.
grandmother, is a fantastic cook. Like she would
Mm.
make her own puff pastries and
Wow.
she would do everything from scratch herself at that
Mm.
time, in the 50s.
Mhm.
So mom learned a lot from her about cooking. And I
Mhm.
think that's how she got interested. But mom just took it to another level, I
Mm.
guess.
Mhm. 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 Yeah. Is Delhi the place that feels most at home, or does this other place you just mentioned feel like home?
I think now, at one point, Delhi felt like home. Delhi is definitely familiar territory for me.
Mm. Mhm.
But because my dad was in the army, we never lived in our hometown.
Mhm.
We were always traveling, always in other parts of India. So
Mhm.
when my dad took retirement from the army and he wanted to set up his own practice, his own
Mhm.
neurology clinic, he chose to go back to our hometown so he could be close to aunts, uncles, relatives, mother, father,
Mhm.
all of that. So he just
Mhm.
wanted to be close to the people he had missed being around. So
Yes.
they've been there 20 years now, and I go back a lot more than I ever did in my life. So for the last
Mhm.
20 years, I've gone back to my hometown a lot. And so I would say that feels like home to
That
me
feels
more
like
than
home.
Delhi now.
I see.
Yes.
And what is that? What's the name of that town?
So I come from a state called
Oh,
Bihar,
Bihar.
and my hometown is called Patna.
Okay.
Patna, and it has such a rich history, really. Like it had a huge part to play in Indian history.
Mm.
So it's very rich culturally.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm. Do you want to give us a synopsis, a summary of that critical history?
Okay, I will try not to be like mom, but I will. I will say as much as I know about the history. And basically, Patna, the it was where one of the first empires of India was set up. And at that time, it was the Mauryan Empire. And Patliputra, which is the old name for Patna, Patliputra is what it was called, and that was the capital of that empire. And that empire was set up by Chandragupta Maurya. He has a lot of mention in Indian history. And later on, Ashoka, who is one of the most famous rulers of India, he went on to take over the Mauryan Empire. So it all started from Patna. Patliputra was the capital. And of course, Patna is on the banks of river Ganges, which has a huge religious significance in the Hindu culture. Also, Patna was one of the first cantonments where the British set up in India. And so the architecture is very influenced by that. So I love that. It's like a business hub. It's a health center for the region. It's also got a ton of educational, schools and colleges, some set up during the British era. So it has all of that. But there are streets where you walk and you feel like you've traveled back in time, and you're back into the, yes, it's the British era, the Victorian style. It's just amazing. So I just love that contrast that I get there. I always feel like I've traveled back in time. So so Patna it's rich in a lot of ways.
So special. So special. I'm thinking, as you were telling about that, I was thinking about your mom being a history teacher. And here in the US, we go back maybe 400 years to Jamestown. You know what I mean? But your mom, when she teaches history, wow, she's going back millennia.
300 BC or earlier. Yes.
Amazing. All the more amazing. So fill us in a little bit. I feel like you talked a little bit about how, your mom made your childhood almost idyllic. I'm sure it had its own problems in many ways, because everyone's does. And there were things that were difficult, but there were things that she made so beautiful about your childhood. Tell us about the university, architecture, meeting your husband, traveling, settling in Singapore. What order did all of that happen in? How did that go? And then we'll tackle switching to food photography.
Oh, wow. That's okay. So, contrary to what you would think, so I met my husband first.
Oh, okay.
In the sense that we met when we were 9 years old.
Oh, so did you?
We did. That is when my dad was posted in Jammu Kashmir, which was his state. In his hometown, there was a huge army base, and my dad was posted there for 3 years. And he was my classmate. So
yes, you said you went to middle school together.
Yes, we did. We met in 6th grade. So we met each other way before we knew where we would be in life. And but we always were in separate cities. We lost contact for many, many years. We got back in contact through common friends, but we were never, even once we got back in touch, which was after finishing my undergrad or during my undergrad days in architecture. Wow. We always lived in different continents. Wow. So I did my undergrad from India in architecture, and then I moved to the US to do my master's. Okay. And he was, at that time, he was working with a business school in Paris. And so he was in France. Wow. And then he moved to Singapore. So we were always shuttling and, just shuffling between continents. We were always in a long distance. But
so this was always a special relationship, even from the time that you were schoolmates.
That's right. It was always testing us. And it was testing our internet connection.
So, what stood out to you as a 9-year-old boy? What stood out to you about your husband?
Well, he was very biased towards me, and I loved it. So he's a great guy, and he's really he's very intelligent. So he's almost never come second in his life, kind of a guy, but he's so grounded. And if you meet him, he's he's just out there to help everybody. Like he does not need anything in return. And I'm like, you are not Mahatma Gandhi, and he's just that kind of a person. And we are, I think, yin and yang. So my high energy and his calmness, they kind of complement each other. And he was just, I don't know, this just, I guess love is blind. That's what it is.
Oh, well, sounds like you're both. Yeah, it sounds like you were kind of made for each other, honestly. And it sounds like there's a lot to love about him. And obviously all of us listening can tell there's so much to love about you. So that's a wonderful story. I absolutely love that. That's wonderful.
Thanks, Becky. Thanks.
Well, go ahead.
So my architecture was actually quite accidental. My getting into architecture was just by chance. It was not like I was an artist. It was not like I was creative. It was not like that I wanted to be an architect my whole life. I actually, how you're 17 and you either know exactly what you want
or you have no idea.
Or you have no idea. So I was one of those children. I had no idea. I just, again, it was at a time where careers were limited. The choices were limited. Like if somebody said that you could be an influencer, I mean, that was not even exist in that time. It was so off to even think about something like that. So there were only certain options available. And
do you mean in general, or do you mean for women?
I would say in India.
Oh, okay.
And not just, I mean, I can't say for other countries, but I would say that in India, all Indian parents look for something that's lucrative, but very stable for the children. And they have a huge role to play in decision making. It's not like the child will figure it out themselves and they will make their own decisions. It was not like that. The parents really guided us through. Sometimes for good, sometimes for worse. But I mean, at 17, honestly, I feel like I was definitely not ready to take such a big decision of my life and live with it my whole life, without swaying anywhere. So at that time, I wanted to be a veterinary doctor because I loved animals. And it just did not fall in place. Like, first of all, my dad was a neurologist and he was like, maybe you should be a neurologist.
Right, of course. Yes.
So it was not for me. And engineering was definitely not for me. For someone who can't add 2 and 10 together, engineering was not for me. And so architecture just kind of, we had a friend who went into architecture school and it seemed like a very good balance of creativity and science. And also because I got through I got a good score in the entrance exam and I made it to one of the top colleges in the country. Wow. So I was like, whoa, all right, fine, done, deal. Wow. I don't have to sit for any more
I think
exams.
You can probably add pretty well if you got into one of the finest colleges in the country.
Maths was not my strength, Becky. It wasn't. But I was very lucky to get into that college because I'm not sure. Have you heard of French architect Le Corbusier?
Oh, yes.
Corbusier. So
yes, I have.
So Corbusier designed our college and Corbusier designed our city. So I studied in Chandigarh, which was completely designed by Corbusier. So I was literally in the mecca of architecture.
Wow.
And I learned a lot. And from there, I think my interest in healthcare was always there. I went on to one of the best schools in the US.
I don't want people to miss that. You're saying you're interested in healthcare.
Healthcare. That came from my childhood of walking hospitals with my dad. So it's amazing how things shape, our childhood experiences shape who we become. And people hated healthcare architecture. No one wanted to design hospitals. And I was like, me, pick me,
Interesting. Interesting. And is that because I'm guessing, but maybe I'm wrong, that there was that was driven by a desire to make a hospital more functional? You felt like if you designed it well, it could be more functional, or was it a creative thing? There was something about the challenge of it that drew you creatively.
I think. It came. Yeah, it came. I think it came from my understanding of how hospitals ran and functioned, which is very difficult. It is not something everyone gets. The logistics are crazy. The kind of planning that goes into constructing a hospital is crazy. And if you've not been there yourself, I think most people struggled with it and they found it a bit dry. But for me, it was intuitive. I could tell you exactly how an operating theater had to be done. I knew exactly where the scrubs had to be. I knew exactly how the doctor had to go. I knew all of those things because I had been in hospitals my whole life, going for ICU rounds with my father when I was little, or, at one point, we even lived in one of the wards when we didn't have accommodation in a city. I was always in a healthcare environment and it was very comfortable for me.
Wow.
So it was probably the most intuitive thing for me. And I realized that as an architect, I actually had the opportunity to create a healing space.
Incredible.
A healing space,
Incredible. And how amazing, by the way, that your dad brought you along on all of this.
Yeah. I mean, at that time, it was like mom was like, somebody take one child, I'll take care of the other one. So dad would pick me and take me to the hospital. But it shaped everything. Like my entire 15 years in architecture, studying, designing, it was all healthcare. That was my love for it. And I actually went to the US only to get a specialization in healthcare architecture. I applied to 3 schools, only 3. And I said, I will not take anything else because this is what I want to do. And I will not do anything else. And I got into my favorite one.
What was that?
Texas A&M.
Wow. So they have a strong healthcare architecture program.
They had the best healthcare program in the country. Yeah.
Wow.
So I did a master's in architecture and I got an additional degree in designing healthcare facilities. So it was amazing. That really changed everything for me. Actually, that put a seed idea in my head, something that I feel that I learned so much from the American culture.
What's that?
So I was in the master's program. I was 24 years old. My classmate was this guy who was, I think, 20 years old. And he used to be a history major who had changed majors. And suddenly he wanted to be an architect. So he was doing his master's. And my other classmate was his grandmother, who was 70 years old. And she wanted to do a master's in architecture. And I thought that I have never looked at life this way. I never knew that you could change your decision, that you could do something else after doing something else. I didn't think it was an option we had in life, honestly. And when I saw that, I was blown away. I was like, wow, it just opened something for me. It's not like I changed or I switched careers immediately.
It was a little seed that was planted that much later.
I appreciated that so much, about the culture. That again impacted me in a very, very big way. So I guess that showed up a few years later.
Yeah. So yes. So where did healthcare design take you around the world? And then when did you switch to food photography? It is a massive switch.
It is. It's crazy. So healthcare design was my life. You know how people get up in the morning and read the newspaper? I used to read the healthcare news.
Wow.
I was addicted. I was insane.
Were you married at the time?
I was not. So at that time, my boyfriend was in Singapore while I was doing my master's in Texas. And while I was doing my master's, apart from the master's program, I also received a couple of fellowships. So this was all in addition to the coursework. So I actually went and I researched cancer treatments. And I traveled the world. I got a grant. I traveled to Japan. I traveled to Germany to study that treatment so that I could come back and I could design the first prototype in the United States. That was my craziness for healthcare.
The first prototype to treat in
cancer.
what way?
So it was, you've heard of proton therapy, right?
Yes.
So this was the next level. This was carbon therapy. And there were very few countries in the world. It was a very expensive treatment. There were very few countries in the world who were working actually from nuclear facilities, and they were testing it out. And so I traveled and I worked with nuclear physicists to understand what's the machinery, what's the equipment, what does it take, how do we design it, what's going to go in it. So I traveled to different countries through that fellowship. And then I came back and I submitted a design for MD Anderson Cancer Center in Texas. So they are one of the largest cancer centers in the States, I think. So I did like a prototype design for them, which was part of the fellowship, but it took my craziness to another level.
Wow.
I worked in Virginia in a healthcare architecture firm. And
we were neighbors.
Yeah. Oh my God. I loved it. Oh, I
Virginia's
missed that.
beautiful.
It's too beautiful. I loved it. And then my boyfriend and I decided to get married finally. And I did not want an online wedding. I did not want cyber children. So I decided to move to Singapore.
Wow.
So I moved for love.
And you had done this big design though. It's almost like you did this. It's almost like you reached the apex of your career in like almost no time. You're like, what do I do now?
No, it wasn't. It wasn't a real project. It was more like a prototype, like a research project, you could call that. So it wasn't like that. But yeah, I mean, I had a very good network in the United States. I had my professors, I had business connections, I had industry connections, and I was doing very, very well. And I decided to leave that for love and move to Singapore, which was heartbreaking. I still remember I took my flight from New York. I sat in the flight, and for once I as the flight just took off, I had like tears rolling down. It was a very difficult decision, but in hindsight, I don't see how it would have worked out in any other way,
You don't regret the decision, obviously.
I regretted it for a while in the sense that I had a bit of a struggle finding my foothold in healthcare architecture in Singapore because things were done very differently here. I did, however, find some good firms to work with, and I designed 2 very big hospitals here.
Wow.
But I think in the end, like, that was one of the reasons that made me switch. And it was just culturally, I was not aligned. Like when I say culturally, it's like the professional culture. The professional culture, I was not completely aligned. And I think I was just looking for something, so I got a lot of joy in the work that I did here, and I learned a lot. But I still love, people switch careers because they hate their jobs or they hate something. I loved it. I just didn't like the people, I guess.
Interesting. So if you had stayed in the US, first of all, you'd be a lot less lucky in love and you wouldn't have your daughter, but you may have never switched to food photography.
100%. I have no doubt about it. Yes.
That's interesting.
I would have never done that. Yeah.
Life is interesting. Man, you just can't be afraid. You can't be afraid to make change, can you?
You cannot be, and you
cannot be afraid to make changes. So then was it like a light bulb all at once? I'm going to be a food photographer. Or was it like this slow, like you're stepping along carefully on stones across, a creek,
So it's so funny how it happened, because this, like, food was not even a career option, right? And now when I look back, I feel like it was in my face the whole time. And I just refused to look at it. It was telling me, pick me. And I didn't, So
it was patiently waiting for you.
Yeah, I guess whatever you do in life, I feel like it's actually going to bring you to what you're actually meant to do. You just have to take that leap of faith. And I guess I took it, but this is not the way I describe my switch. So I always say, this is exactly how I describe it. So, I always say that, the moment when you jump off a cliff and you make it, but then you look up and then you realize what you
how did I just do that?
Oh my God, did you survive? How did you even survive it? So I guess my journey, my switch was exactly that, Becky. It was this huge risk and a huge leap of faith that I took. And I don't know how I did it. I just did, so 6 years I was working as an architect in Singapore, and I was really liking the work, but I think that somewhere the culture had gotten to me, and I was taking a break from architecture where I just wanted to cook. I just wanted to be around food. I had missed
You turned
it
to it for comfort and all of that.
Absolutely.
Difficulty. Yeah.
And my life as an architect was very stressful. I was always at the verge of a panic attack or a collapse. Like I worked 24/7, 7 days a week. In the middle of the night, I would check emails and reply to emails. So I learned a lot, but I was very stressed. And then suddenly I had this time where I was in my happy place and I was cooking. It had nothing to do with photography. I literally just cooked and I shared photos on our family WhatsApp group,
Yeah.
And then my sister one day told me about Instagram and I was like, what is that? Because as an architect, I was not even on social media. So I go on Instagram and I start putting out my bad photos. And then suddenly one day somebody wanted to pay me to take photos of their food. And I was like, what? Is this possible? Does this happen? Does this exist? What is this? Who pays for taking food photos? And I was taking really bad food photos. Yeah. It was
a
all
customer for everyone.
So true. Yeah, so they weren't even good photos. But again, I guess there was just this thought in my mind that, is there a possibility? Like, am I sitting on something? And I'm not a person who likes regrets. I can't live with it. And I feel like if there's ever an opportunity, something in front of me, and I don't do it, I can't sleep at night. So this thought of being paid to take a food photo was very interesting. And the thing was that because I came from an architecture background, things like rhythm, harmony, aesthetics, color, proportion, this was second nature to me.
Yes.
There was just one minor detail that I had never used a DSLR in my life. I mean, minor detail. It was so funny, Becky, that I actually went ahead and I said, I'm going to start a food photography business. And at that time, I had no money. I had never used a DSLR and I had no idea what a photography business meant. And yet I just went all in and I put myself on a timer. I had a few job offers on the table from other architecture firms. I said, give me 4 months. I asked for 4 months. I said, give me 4 months and I will come back to you whether I can join you or not. I will let you know.
Yeah.
In those 4 months, I went and I first took a 2-hour workshop to understand how to even hold a camera.
Yeah.
How to get it on manual mode. Yeah. And then went and bought a lens. And then I was like, okay, if I want to be a photographer, I need to shoot for restaurants. So I need to be a commercial food photographer. So let me go and learn how to use artificial light. So at the end of 4 months, I not only knew how to use a camera on manual mode, I knew how to use artificial light as well. Yeah. Not that I was great at it, but I knew how to use it. And
which puts you above, I think, about 90 or 95% of photographers.
Oh, wow. Well, why would you say that?
Being able to use artificial light.
Yeah. I guess, it's become more common now. It was less at that time. But I knew it from the beginning that if I have to go in, I have to go all in, just give it my best
absolutely.
shot.
Yes.
So at the end of that 4-month mark, I actually went ahead and registered the business in Singapore. Wow. So we were a legal business. We were up and running. And within I just started working like crazy. I was practicing photography for 8 hours a day. And I was just working like my tail was on fire. And I had my first client in just a few months, and they were the largest retailer in Singapore. Wow. So it was through word of mouth, but it gave me such a big boost. And after that, I don't think I've ever worked for a client just once. There's been no looking back since then.
Amazing.
It's just been a series of, I guess, leaps of faith. And
Amazing.
I don't know if I would have done this earlier, but I feel like my architecture had a huge role to play in my photography, you know.
So I'd like to know a little bit more about that. Visually, I'm sure. I suspect also the lessons on business and professionalism that you learned as an architecture were equally as important. Am I right or wrong on that?
Absolutely. You're spot on. Absolutely. That's exactly what I meant. You know, just being able to conduct yourself in a meeting. And not just that, if your client has requirements, how do you conceptualize it? How do you give them sketches? How do they know what you're going to give them? You know, delivering a project from A to Z and just being able to understand client requirements, coming up with your own system of how you take them through the creative process, and you know, certain, like, how do you bring your values and your professional etiquette to the shoot, and how do you make them want to work only with you? So I guess the way all of that put together, I guess it just came from all these years that I had been sitting and working with clients in architecture.
Yeah, right.
It was not
exactly.
new. I was very comfortable.
Yes. And you took yourself seriously.
I did. I took myself very too seriously. I think at some points I had to remind myself, this is why you left architecture, remember? You know, so
yes. And now you have a podcast to teach other people about these concepts and to try to help them better at food photography and better at food photography business.
Absolutely, Becky. This podcast is like just so close to my heart. It is also one of those jump off the cliff kind of decisions. You know, it really wasn't something that was brewing and something I dreamt of, but it felt so right in my gut that I woke up one day and I declared to the world and to my husband that I'm going to start a podcast. And it took me 1 year to start it because my daughter was only 1 year old at that time. And I had a lot of commitments with her. So I was very slow. And there were many times where I felt like, is this what I really want to do? And every time I just kept coming back to it. So yeah, the podcast is, I would say my heart is really in it, you know, so it's basically a podcast for all like food content creators. So food stylists, food photographers, hobbyists, businesses, food bloggers, like just anyone who creates food related content for any kind of media. And I think because I built a business from ground up, and I feel like I know the pain, and I didn't come from any business background. And I feel like I just have to be out there to make it easier for everyone else, because it is not that difficult, you know? So yeah, I cover everything from photography to styling technique to, you know, business. We also talk about social media, but I think I talk also a lot about positive mindset. I think that's played a very big role in me being able to survive and move forward in my creative journey. So the podcast, is all about that.
People definitely need to tune in. So tell them where to find it and where else to find you on social media.
So my podcast is called My Food Lens, and that's pretty much my name everywhere. You can find me on Instagram. If you're into food styling, food photography, and a ton of fun reels, then I'm at Dyutima_myfoodlens on Instagram.
Yes.
But my website, blog, podcast, Facebook, Pinterest, everything is My Food Lens. So it's super duper easy.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dyutima. Thank you so much for your time. Is there anything you wanted to say that I didn't give you a chance to say?
I think I'm all good. I think I spoke more than you needed me to say.
No, I loved every second of it. I love to know about your story. And I really do encourage people to go listen to your podcast. I think you are the person for sure to be sharing this information with the world.
Oh, thank you, Becky. This was so wonderful. I've always talked about photography and, you know, the technical stuff on other podcasts, but I was so emotional when I was actually preparing or getting ready, you know, because your podcast is amazing. It brought back so many memories. It made me think in such a different way. And it actually took me back to my eternal love for food and where it came from. So thank you so much for having me. It was such an honor, such a pleasure, really.
I feel exactly the same. It was an honor to have you, to hear your story, to be inspired by your parents. Just how remarkable are your parents? And look at this legacy that they've left through you. And I'm sure if we heard your sister's story, it would be an equal legacy. And I think that's inspiring to me, as a parent, just to remember, like, keep putting that time in, because wow, look how you took it and ran, and then to hear your story and these risks you were willing to take. And some of them, I mean, I think it was good for me to hear. I think my biggest takeaway today with where I am in my story and what's happening in my life this week is that you made a decision that made you sad, even though you knew it was the best and the right decision. Like, you knew how to prioritize. It's such a difficult thing, I think, to say, well, I can't have it all, so I'm going to choose what's best, ride this wave of grief, and then make the best of what I've chosen, which is really what you did. Because really, you could have descended into bitterness and said, I knew I shouldn't have moved to Singapore. And if we could just go back to the US, but you didn't look back, and you made the best then of what you knew was the best decision, which is very difficult to do. I really applaud you on that.
Thank you. I think that was probably the hardest decision I took. And it really impacted me for many, many years. I battled with it. And I think I felt depressed for a few years. It would come back again, and it would show up in different ways, but yeah, I guess I'm very happy now because it was leading me to this.
Isn't that good for all of us to hear? Yes.
I think we just have to, if we ever wake up with a feeling, we must address it. If there is a calling, just pay attention to it, even if it is for a moment. I feel like every time we get ourselves out of our comfort zone, or every time we listen to something that our gut is telling us, we are opening an opportunity for ourselves. So, that's what I believe. So it's best not to have regrets. What's the worst that can happen, right?
Right. I appreciate that so much. Yeah. Well, you've taught me a lot about cooking, a lot about India, a lot about how to live life, a lot about how to make my decisions for today. So I appreciate it all so much. I hope you have such a wonderful evening. And I just can't wait to share this with listeners.
So, did you enjoy that? A few laughs, some emotion, some inspiration, some nostalgia. Did that come across? Yeah, did that happen? Well, this episode is very close to my heart, and that's why I wanted to start the year with it and share it with you. And our paths are just so similar. Our struggles, our journeys meet at so many points. And if you also felt that, if there were parts that you related to, please let me know what resonated. Or perhaps, a question came up about switching careers, or about life, or about love. Anything that struck a chord with you on this episode, I want to hear it. Please, I request you. So send me an email with your thoughts on hello@myfoodlens.com, or you know where to find me on Instagram. Just send me a DM on Instagram at Ditama_myfoodlens. Well, thank you so much. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being here, for allowing me to be a part of your journey, as we start another era of the My Food Lens podcast. You know how I always say that if you weren't here, this podcast wouldn't be either. And you know that I mean it, right? So thank you, boss. I'll see you next week with another episode. Bye-bye.